health and several activities related to health economics aspects for immunization and assisting the JKN cost control quality control team with Itagi Health Economics Working Group. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Professor Dr. Mardiati Najib.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Good morning, everyone. Selamat pagi semua. Welcome to our morning session. We are lucky to have four distinguished panelists this morning. We will be discussing about vaccine, the hot topic of the year, including in Indonesia. We understand that by implementing vaccination for people, we will be prevented from COVID-19, avoiding severe catastrophic cases, and we hope we could build our economy. Yesterday, I think we have discussed a lot how important to deal with the prevention of COVID-19. We don't want that business transaction will be going down. And on the other hand, we realize that we have a limit on our budget. We learned that government has been focusing on health. This is like a blessing in disguise for health sector. But on the other side, all health facilities have to be ready coping COVID-19. And we learned yesterday that vaccination still has to be accelerated to reach the target of vaccination. And achieving herd immunity is important, no doubt about that. We must secure the vaccine. It is a central policy in our country, whether it is imported or we have to initiate local production. And what would be the cost? We will learn from our panelists this morning about interesting lesson on vaccination and COVID. And also later we also learn about vaccine licensing. So we have four panelists. Let me introduce. We have Mr. Somil Nakbal, PhD, Senior Health Specialist, World Bank Indonesia Country Office. Panji Fortuna Hadi Sumarto, Dr. MPH PhD, Lecturer at the Department of Public Health, Faculty of Medicine, Universitas Padjadjaran. Professor Dr. Amin Subandrio, PhD, Head of Eijkman Institute for Molecular Biology. And Ibu Dr. Sri Harsiti Teki, Director of Marketing Research and Development of PT Bio Farma. So I'd like to invite our first panelist, Mr. Somil Nakbal, PhD. Somil is, allow me to read his CV. He is the cluster lead for the World Bank's Health and Nutrition Program in Indonesia and Timor-Leste, having served recently in a similar capacity for Cambodia and Laos PDR. Prior to joining the World Bank in 2009, Somil has served as the health insurance regulator for India and also in the Indian Ministry of Finance and Health. He represents World Bank as a core team member in Global Universal Health Coverage initiatives such as the Joint Learning Network, JLN, for Universal Health Coverage and Universal Health Coverage 2030. Somil qualified as medical doctor with dual postgraduate degree in hospital administration and financial management, and is a fellow of the Insurance Institute of Indonesia. So he will be delivering the title of the speech is Vaccine as the Strategy to Accelerate the Economy of Indonesia. It's a very interesting title. So Somil, time is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Bu Mardiati, and it's a pleasure being here with everybody this morning. Thanks to the organizers of INAHIA for inviting us to this very important event, and pleasure to be here for a second year in a row. I had the pleasure of participating in the previous INAHIA as well. So without much further ado, I'm going to share my screen and start the discussion. This is something that we, as Bu Mardiati said, is a very important part of the world strategy this year. for both a health outcome reason and for an economic reason. And we're going to see briefly on why that is the case. So the global context is that the COVID-19 pandemic has remained unpredictable. New variants, especially the Delta variant, have flared up cases in several countries around the world. The main important thing in this last few months is that vaccines have weakened the links between cases and deaths. So countries with a high level of vaccination are seeing that this time when cases went up, they did not see as many hospitalizations and as many deaths. And that is the main contribution that is being seen in a real life setting from the vaccines. However, there is a lot of challenges in the distribution of the vaccines. The low-income countries remain unprotected from COVID-19. While many developed countries have more than 50% of the population now covered fully, less than 2% of the people in low-income countries have received even one dose, just one dose. So this is leading to increased cases and deaths and continued spread of variants, which is of global concern. So the equitable distribution of vaccines and fair distribution across countries is more important than ever. The vaccine supply landscape is shifting slowly. More production is becoming available. New manufacturing capacity is being expanded. New vaccines are being approved. And offers from platforms such as COVAX and the African AVAT are all mitigating some of the challenges, even more so in 2022. But still, in the current year, 2021, supplies have remained largely difficult, though they are improving in the last quarter. And as this landscape becomes more complex, there will need to be even more transparency and global coordination so that we can all be efficient and equitable in the response, which is good for the world. Just some statistics, 43.3% of the world's population has received at least one dose of a COVID-19 vaccine as of now. What is remarkable, 6 billion doses, almost 6 billion doses have been administered globally, 5.95 to be precise, and 30 million or so doses are being now administered every day. The problem is that only 1.9% of the population living in low-income countries has received at least one dose. The economic impact of the pandemic is very severe. As we can see from this chart, which is fresh off the press. This book was actually launched just a few hours back. This paper, From Double Shock to Double Recovery, was just launched yesterday, a few hours back in Washington, DC. And as this paper shows, this is looking at the annual growth rate in real per capita GDP since the year 2000 and projecting it also for the next few years. And as we can see, the global financial crisis was the reason in these years around 2008 and 2009, where there was a dip in the growth and many countries entered into negative growth territory. The GDP actually declined in this period. And that had severe consequences, as many of us would remember. But then if you look at the impact of the pandemic, the declines are even deeper. And these declines are being faced by all levels of income. In contrast to, if you look at the global financial crisis in 2008-2009, the low-income countries and the low-middle-income countries had a lesser impact, and many of them did not actually enter negative territory. But now, if we see, it is across all income groups. Of course, there will be country-to-country variation. But this is across all income groups, and it is much deeper, much deeper than the decline in GDP and the negative territory of GDP that we saw in the global financial crisis a little more than a decade earlier. If we also look at this, the time it will take countries to come back with economic growth and bounce back to the level of growth that was being seen, or level of GDP growth that was being seen in the past, is going to take a few years to come back to the same level as before the pandemic. So you see the level of 2019 will be a steady state only after 3 or 4 years. So the global economy would have lost the increases in GDP that would have been experienced in these 3-4 years. It is completely going to be lost in the decline and then trying to recover from a decline. And this is going to adversely affect, disproportionately affect the poor. The per capita government revenue, this was the previous slide was on GDP, but the per capita revenue, how much the government will raise by its own taxes and other sources over the same period of time, shows pretty much similar trends. Of course, it is much more marked in the case of high income countries, but it is not much different in case of lower middle income and upper middle income countries as well, where there is going to be this great lockdown, the pandemic-induced declines in government revenue, and which will take a long time to recover. This will reduce fiscal space. This will reduce the availability of money that can be spent by the government, and this will create pressure on the potential investments possible for all sectors of the economy, but particularly for non-COVID health services. This could be having major implications. So the introduction of safe and effective vaccines is one of the best ways to mitigate the impact of COVID-19 on lives and livelihoods. Of course, we will still need to follow public health measures because vaccines will not reduce the spread to as much extent, but they will protect people from hospitalization and severe illness and death. But and so that will keep the economy going. But if you look at what is being predicted now, again, based on IMF projections, if this square for each of the countries, the square was the situation before the pandemic, the tip of the arrow is the projected per capita growth in 2020. So many countries have gone from positive territory to negative territory in the East Asia and Pacific region. And in the East Asia and Pacific region, which this chart denotes, we see that very few countries have managed to stay above zero, and most have actually gone down for 2020 projections. Global poverty, which has been showing a very favorable trend, pre-crisis forecast was that it would continue to improve, but now with the crisis, global poverty is expected to start rising again, and this is again not a very favorable sign. We need to mitigate these impacts, and that's why we need to make sure that the wheels of the economy keep running, and we take all the strategic actions possible, including vaccines and masks and everything else that we can do in terms of public health measures. The challenges of achieving 70% of vaccination coverage for the world's 7.8 billion population are many. From developing vaccines, completing trials, approval, manufacturing capacity, deployment, special transportation and shipping arrangements and logistics for mRNA type of vaccines, country level cold chain, finding the priority groups, getting them identification where not available, finding equitable ways of distributing. How do we get enough vaccinators? How do we handle misinformation and hesitancy? How do we manage all the waste that is already being created by the pandemic and now added by the vaccination waste? And how do we get the right IT systems? This all is creating an unprecedented, a never before public health endeavor in human history that is now happening. And it is the effort of many people who have brought all of this to happen, which all look very complex, even until a few months back. So again, a very important message, if we can see, vaccines are weakening the link between cases and deaths. We do need more research for each variant of concern, but on the left-hand side are some countries which have high vaccination coverage. And we see that in these countries, even when cases went up, the cases are in blue, even when the cases went up this time, deaths which are in red did not go up. So we see the situation of UK, we see the situation of Portugal, When in the past cases went up, deaths also went up, but that has been prevented. Now in the new increase in cases, deaths have been contained because of vaccination. However, in countries with lower coverage of vaccines, like the others on this panel, even with the current wave, the deaths have continued to be very high. So in LIC, in low-income countries and low-middle-income countries where coverage is low, these variants overwhelm the health system and cause deaths. But it has been more contained in countries where a large part of the population was vaccinated, so the health system had more capacity because less people were requiring the hospitalization. So this is all real-world data that we can see, and with this, we can clearly see that vaccines have been effective in preventing hospitalization and death, and thereby keeping the wheels of the economy moving. In countries with low vaccine coverage, that has not been the case, unfortunately. And also important to prioritize that vaccines alone will not be sufficient. Public health measures will continue to be important for preventing the spread of new variants. So all testing, tracing, and containment measures will continue to be important. The impact of all of this on human capital has been very severe. The recovery is strong but uneven, and it all depends on vaccination progress. There were a lot of people affected. Last year, 4 million women lost access to care during childbirth. 23 million children missed out on basic vaccinations. 82 million children did not receive the oral rehydration they would receive for diarrhea. And an additional 150 million people are estimated to fall into extreme poverty. It has also exacerbated gender inequalities. So this is all very, very much a much deeper impact that we need to be worried about, and where we have some hope if we can combine the current strategies available to us. Finally, this is not something that is unknown to the people here. As we can see, Indonesia is just coming out of a very major Delta surge that overwhelmed our health systems. But the vaccination rates have steadily picked up. The rates have now crossed 1.4 million a day, which is very encouraging. And by September 20th, 34 million people had received at least one dose. And so now about 29%, 45 million had been fully vaccinated, and an additional 34 million had received at least one dose. So more than 124 million doses have already been administered in Indonesia. The rate is steady. Every 2 days, we are vaccinating 1% of the population now. So 29% of the country's population had received at least one dose a day before. Today's statistics would be 30%. And so the number is quite encouraging at the trend that it has now come. However, the next phase will be marked by more concerns, because now the distribution bottlenecks and the hesitancy bottlenecks will start growing as we move beyond the first 50% or so numbers, as was the case with other countries as well. So Indonesia was amongst the first countries globally to announce free vaccines to its entire adult population as early as December 2020. And because it had secured a large part of its supplies by December 2020, it has been comfortable and has been less subject to the global vaccine supply constraints. Vaccines arrival in Indonesia are already more than 239 million doses, and this is going to further accelerate. The age group has been expanded to more than 208 million beneficiaries, with the coverage above 12 now. And the government has committed $14.9 billion for COVID response, including the vaccination. So these are all very creditable aspects of the progress. They will continue to be sustained, especially as the next phase of the vaccination will be even more difficult as we try to cover the last mile and try to get over hesitancy. But it will be important given the impact it has on the economy, and as part of a package of strategies to recover and bounce back the economy. So I'll stop there, and on this note, I'll pass it on back to Bu Mardiati. Over to you, Bu Mardiati.
Thank you, Dr. Sonil, for very interesting presentation. So we learn, economic impact of the pandemic is severe, and to come back to the situation before COVID, it will take years. So we have to be prepared and carefully work very hard to cope with this situation. And the good thing is Indonesia is the 7th country globally to achieve milestone 100 million doses. But along with vaccine, all measures for testing, tracing, and other containment measures still need to be continued. So I'd like to invite our second panelist, Dr. Panji Fortuna Hadi Sumarto. The title of his presentation is very interesting. It's a question: vaccines, dapat herd immunity? Dr. Panji is a lecturer at the Faculty of Medicine Universitas Padjadjaran. He is also external consultant for the Center of Policy Analysis and Harmonization, PASKAS. PASKAS ini kumpulan anak-anak muda yang membantu Pak Menteri, ya. He is also researcher at the Tuberculosis Working Group, Universitas Padjadjaran, Health Technology Assessment Member Unit, Universitas Padjadjaran, SDG Center Member, Universitas Padjadjaran. He's a medical doctor. He graduated his Master of Public Health in Georgia State University and Harvard School of Public Health. So, Dr. Panji, time is yours. You have like 20 minutes.
Thank you, Ibu Mardiati, for the generous introduction. And thank you also for the committee for having me in this very distinguished conference for the health economists. I'm myself not a health economist, but I'm very happy to share with you little that I know about herd immunity. So I was given a title by the committee about vaccines, whether it is a path to herd immunity or not. So it's a question, and I hope I can answer that question at the end of the presentation. So let me start with what is herd immunity. I think this is a terminology that we often hear after the COVID-19 pandemic started. But as a matter of fact, the term herd immunity has different meanings. But let me start with where it started. Probably people ask, why herd? It seemed that the term herd immunity was first coined by a veterinarian, Dr. Potter, in early 1900. So he was describing a disease, the abortion disease, which is a sexually transmitted disease in cattle that causes abortion in sheep, in cows. So he said that abortion disease may be likened to a fire, which, if new fuel is not constantly added, soon dies down. So herd immunity is developed, therefore, by retaining the immune cows, raising the calves, and avoiding the introduction of foreign cattle. So herd immunity is used in herd of cattle. That's why the term herd. But not long after that, the term herd immunity is used in human herd as well. So the picture here was entitled "The Human Herd, Greenwich Hospital Schoolboys at Dinner." So, well, in a way, a group of people looks like a herd of cattle. So they go together, they remain and stay and do activities together in a place. So that's the term herd. Although some people now dislike the term herd immunity, some people use population immunity. But for the sake of familiarity, let's just use the term of herd immunity. So what is herd immunity? So one of the definition, very common definition of herd immunity, is a reduction in the risk of infection that occurs when a significant proportion of the population has become immune to infection. So now this definition is not without controversy. So it's not without dispute. Some people say that herd immunity does not refer to the degree of protection. It just shows the level of immunity a herd or a population have. But it has to be differentiated with the herd effect, or that is the degree of protection conferred by the herd immunity. So, but okay, long story short, let's just use the term in herd immunity, and let's just confine this definition into the more common definition that people use as a degree of protection conferred by the proportion of immune individuals in a population. So this is a dictionary definition. So the herd immunity is very closely related to what we call the herd immunity threshold. So the herd immunity threshold is the answer to the question, what proportion of the population must be immunized in order to protect the rest of the population? So here are the two simple graphs that shows the effect of herd immunity. So in the first graph, we see that this is a case or a disease where each infectious individual can transmit the disease to 4 other susceptible individuals. So this is the, let me show you. Okay, so here is the first case. So when the case is introduced to a fully susceptible population with a basic reproductive number of 4, the infectious person can transmit the disease to 4 other individuals. So in the second generation, we can see 4 cases, and in the third generation, there would be a total of 16 cases. But then what happened if 3/4 of the population are immune to the disease? So what would happen is that the first case would only be able to transmit the disease to 1 other person, and therefore in the second wave, in the second batch of the infected, there would be only 1 person, and so on and so forth. So this is a illustration that shows that in order to protect the population from an outbreak, we have to reduce the reproductive number to 1, because reproductive numbers mean the average number of infection a single case can produce. So if the reproductive number is 1, then the next generation would be the same number as the first generation or the previous generation, meaning a reproductive number of 1 means there would be no outbreak. And to reach that level of reproductive number, we would need to have at least 1/4 basic reproductive number, 1/r0, a proportion of the population immune to the population. And that is what we call the herd immunity threshold. So the herd immunity threshold is the minimum, as the critical proportion in the population that must be immunized in order to reduce the effective reproductive number to 1. So with that simple relationship, this herd immunity threshold, 1/r0, we can see that the threshold increases as the basic reproduction number increases. So for different kind of diseases, infectious diseases, for example, flu, the flu has a basic reproductive number between 2 and 4. So for the flu, we would need at least 40 to 80% of the population immune to achieve herd immunity. But for measles, which has a very high reproductive number of between 10 to 16, we would need almost 100% of the population to be immune to achieve herd immunity. So this is the number, a very important number for us to remember when we talk about herd immunity, the basic reproductive number. So, but these estimations are mostly based on the mass action principle. So the mass action principles assumes that infections occur from direct contacts between infectious and susceptible individuals in a homogeneous randomly mixing population. So this term comes from chemistry, I suppose, and mathematically it can be written as this, that the number of infections is a function of the number of susceptibles. So the number of such that the number of new cases will be related to the number of current cases and the number of current susceptibles and the rate of infections. So this is a very common equation that we see in infectious disease modeling. And whenever we see this equation, that implies the mass action principle is assumed in the modeling. But in reality, human population usually demonstrates some degree of heterogeneous mixing. So this is a seminal paper from Mossong and friends in 2008, where the researchers distributed diaries to a lot of people in many countries, and showed that people really mix heterogeneously. So it's not that one person randomly mix with other person, but we can really see a pattern here. So the bright colors here shows a more intense mixing. So, and we can see that the birds of same feathers flock together. The people within the same age group usually mix together. So the young with the young, the old with the old. But we can also see that the young population tends to cluster more, tend to mix more compared to the older age. And also we can also see heterogeneous mixing between young people with old people, and this we can infer that this is from between children and their parents, or children with their grandparents. So in conclusion, the human population are not homogeneous. And what does that how does that affect herd immunity? So heterogeneity can affect herd immunity in two ways. It can reduce the requirement for herd immunity, but it can also increase. So in one simulation, for example, by Britton et al., they showed that I think, excuse me, there's somebody's microphone is on. Okay, so let's come back here. So from a simulation, it can be shown that when we take into account heterogeneity, the proportion of population that needs to be immune in order to achieve herd immunity may be lower if we take into account heterogeneity. So for example, if we assume homogeneous mixing and the basic reproductive number is 2, then herd immunity can be achieved when half of the population is immune. But if we structure the population into different age groups, then the proportion of immune needed to achieve herd immunity may be reduced to 46%. And if we further assume that people have different activities, and some population group have more higher social interaction than other, and vice versa, some subpopulation have lower social activities compared to the other groups, we can also show that the critical number of the proportion of the population that needs to be immune can be reduced in order to achieve herd immunity. So population are heterogeneous in many ways. So in age structure, some population are older than the others, and activity levels. People in urban areas probably have more activities in offices compared to people in rural areas. But also people have heterogeneity of infectiousness. Some people are more infectious, while some other are less infectious. We know the term super spreader, where some very few people are very infectious and tend to produce more cases compared to normal or average individuals. So aside of this more permanent heterogeneity, heterogeneity can also be seasonal. And this is very important. So seasonal heterogeneity, for example, heterogeneity of activity levels induced by holidays or induced by a school opening, this can lead to transient collective immunity. So, for example, we observe that peaks of cases in Indonesia are almost always preceded by a high level of activities from public holidays, from Christmas and New Year's Eve, from Idul Fitri. That is a form of seasonal heterogeneity, and we can also observe that the high peaks is followed by a very quick reduction in the number of cases. So one of the hypotheses that we can develop from this is that this seasonal heterogeneity, seasonal increase in social activities, also leads to an increase in transmission, but also leads to transient collective immunity. That means soon after the high transmission rate, many people are infected and many people develop immunity, and therefore a collective immunity, a herd immunity is developed. But this kind of herd immunity does not last long. So we can see that now that we are having a very low number of cases, well, compared to a couple of months ago. But this is not forever. This is not herd immunity. This is just transient collective immunity. So the next thing I want to talk about is imperfect immunity. So we also often see this. I'm sorry, I have to go back here. This formula to determine the proportion of population needed to be vaccinated, and from that formula we often derive the number 60 to 70%, assuming that the basic reproductive number is 2.5. But vaccines are not 100% effective, and therefore the previous formula does not apply. So if we calculate, if we take into account vaccine effectiveness, we would see this and take into account reproductive number, we would see this kind of graph. So this shows a critical vaccination threshold, the proportion of population that needs to be vaccinated, assuming a certain degree of vaccine efficacy or effectiveness and disease basic reproductive number. So we can see that as the vaccine efficacy is reduced and the reproductive number is increased, we can see that we would need to vaccinate a higher proportion of the population. At one point, we may not even reach herd immunity because the vaccine is not efficacious enough, or the disease is too infectious, or both. So in that case, we would need to revaccinate people or to vaccinate the same population group over and over again. So that's what it means by this 100% vaccination threshold. So we need to vaccinate everyone in the population over and over again, and that we start to realize that people might need booster vaccination, and that is also closely related to waning immunity. So what would happen if the vaccine, the immunity, the immunity induced by vaccine wane over time, or even by natural infection? So that, in effect, that would be the same as reintroducing susceptible people into the population. So what would we observe is that, comparing to a permanent immunity, which is the blue line, the infection would just be a one-time off. But if immunity wanes, then we would reintroduce susceptible people into the population, and we would observe that the number of cases would not go down to zero, and in fact it will create a sort of oscillation, multiple waves of small outbreaks because of waning immunity. The other one is, this is, I think, the most important question that we need to ask is, do vaccines prevent transmission? Because in fact, herd immunity is a product of indirect effect of the vaccine, meaning herd immunity is created by preventing unvaccinated individual from getting infection. And that is the indirect effect of vaccination. But most of the vaccine trials, most of the efficacy measures that we now know from studies are not measuring the efficacy of the vaccines to prevent transmissions. So we can see here, different trials have different endpoint that they measure. So most of them measure the efficacy of vaccines to reduce symptomatic or severe illness or hospitalization from COVID-19. But very few vaccines actually measure the efficacy of vaccines to reduce transmission. I know of at least one vaccine trial from Oxford AstraZeneca who attempted to measure the effect of vaccine to transmission. But ideally, this is an ideal design of a trial that would be able to measure indirect transmission, which is what we call the study design for dependent happenings, that would try to estimate the effect of vaccination among the unvaccinated. So in contrast to the traditional phase 3 trial that measures the effect of vaccination among the vaccinated, what we need to do in order to measure the effect of vaccine to prevent transmission is to measure the effect of vaccine among the unvaccinated. So, and this is the kind of study we would need to have. And this is, well, this can be very complicated, but we can also add a simple component to ordinary vaccine trial design, such as measuring infection in the family of vaccinated individuals. So, but I have not seen, at least from my side, I have not seen such studies being done, especially in Indonesia. And one last thing, vaccination are not done randomly. And you know, this may be good if we take into account heterogeneous mixing and we target vaccination amongst population subgroup which has the most or the highest social interaction, the highest transmissibility, then we may have a very nice, efficient strategy of vaccination. But that's not the fact. So the fact is that we have non-random vaccination, but that's because, one, the vaccination coverage is uneven. So we can see that Jakarta has the highest proportion of population with complete dose vaccination among target population, that is. But as opposed to Northern Maluku, with only less than 10% of their target population receiving the second dose vaccine. And we have to be mindful that some population groups are excluded from the vaccine. For example, school children under 12 years of age. And if these unvaccinated individuals form clusters, then we might expect that these clusters are at higher risk of having outbreaks. So this is one thing that is very important to answer. Is vaccine the path to herd immunity? Well, definitely it's no. Vaccine is not the path at least for COVID-19. Vaccine is not the path. It is a path to herd immunity, but not a certain one. So we have to be mindful that there are considerable complexities in achieving herd immunity through vaccine and vaccination. So first one is vaccine effectiveness in preventing transmission. Of course, vaccine can reduce transmission in many ways, but we don't know for sure how much vaccine can prevent transmission at this point. And then we have to be mindful about the distribution of the vaccinated. Are unvaccinated individuals clustering and therefore create a higher risk of transmission? And then we also need to be mindful about variation in reproductive number that is affected by variation in social structures and also variation in infectiousness. For example, from the emergence of new variants of the virus. So in conclusion, I think vaccines and vaccination is a superb tool in the pandemic control. It's obviously helping us to reduce deaths and reduce morbidity. But if the aim is to achieve herd immunity in a sense that we reduce transmission, I don't think it's a reasonable objective at this point, at least not in the short run. So that being said, it's a good thing. So we need to increase the coverage, but at the same time, we would need to have the other classical public health measures such as social distancing, wearing masks, and to some extent, if we need to, then public health measure that reduce social activities must be implemented. So with that, I will conclude my presentation, and back to you, Prof. Mardiati. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Dr. Panji. It's very interesting presentation. We learned about the herd immunity, the threshold of the herd immunity, and then how we need to consider other factors and the term of the herd immunity itself. I think you added important points that been addressed by Dr. Somil. That we will still need other public health measures like social distance, wearing masks, and maybe reduce social activities. And achieving herd immunity is great for pandemic control, but not in the short run. So we have still to work hard on this. Yeah? And then to answer the question of the title of your presentation, is vaccine the path to herd immunity? You said no. Okay. But vaccine is a part to herd immunity, but not a certain one. So let's discuss further about that. Let's move to our third panelist, Professor Steering Committee, ASEAN Partnership for Emerging Infectious Disease Research, Board Chairman of Coordinating Organization for Regional Disease Surveillance, member of Expert Panel of Indonesian Global Health Security Agenda Committee, member of National Committee for Bioethics, and member of Expert Committee of COVID-19 Special Task Force. In addition, I know Professor Amin is also a member of ITAGI, NITEC, Indonesian Technical Advisory Group for Immunization. So Prof. Amin will be delivering the future cost of vaccine. Professor Amin, time is yours.
Thank you very much, Professor Mardiati Najib, for your very kind introduction. And Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Very good morning to all of you. First of all, I would like to extend my gratitude to and appreciation to the organizing committee for inviting me to give or share some information about COVID-19. The title given to me is a little bit actually difficult for me because I'm not a health economics, but I will try to share with you from the scientist point of view. Yeah. Please allow me to share my screen with you. Okay, I hope you could see my screen already. The title is Future Cost of Vaccine. We understand that probably has been already discussed or presented by the previous speakers, we understand that there are several platforms of vaccine, but this time I will not discuss about the platform of vaccine, how it works, but merely about the other factors, yeah, because it is also important, not only technical matters, but also funding the vaccine development. So just as a illustration, we know that when it was still in the development phase, for example, Pfizer, BioNTech already received emergency use authorization from the FDA that with the cost per dose was about $19.5 US, and this price of one dose, of course, calculated because the US, for example, committed to purchase about 100 million doses. Yeah, and yeah, from this price, we understand that since Pfizer's vaccine should be given twice, so total cost for the vaccination would become about almost $40 per treatment. How about the other vaccine, the Moderna? Moderna also similar, but a little bit more expensive. Yeah, about 25 to 37 per dose of the mRNA vaccine. Yeah, of course, this is quite expensive. Yeah, but later we will see whether we have to pay for the that number, but we understand that actually the cost of vaccine will be covered by other organizations, not by individual. Similar situation with AstraZeneca Oxford, but AstraZeneca Oxford, they use different platform, and the price of one dose is much less than the mRNA vaccines. Yeah, between $3 to $4. So in serial, so 2 doses it cost $6 to $8. About Johnson and Johnson, yeah, situation also similar, but yeah, after government give commitment of purchasing about 100 million doses, then the price of per dose was calculated around $10. Yeah. Yeah. In summary, if we summarize the cost per jab, yeah, of COVID-19, actually this calculation was made last year. Yeah. Yeah. For example, Moderna mRNA vaccine was $37. CoronaVac, Sinovac from China, about $30. Pfizer, yeah, Pfizer and BioNTech, about $20, and Sputnik 5, produced by Gamaleya Scientific in Russia. But the price of the vaccine, a serial vaccine, is about $10, and also Johnson & Johnson about the same, about $10. So we could imagine if we have to vaccinate hundreds of millions of people, then we just calculate the total amount. Okay. The problem with the costing of vaccination is not only should be calculated in the industrial country, but also in low middle income countries. And based on some calculation, yeah, it is predicted that it would cost up to 80 billion US dollar. But with a special approach, yeah, for example, if the pharmaceutical company would like to waive their intellectual property rights, then the cost could be reduced down to 6.5 billion. It's very significant, yeah. This is, of course, under G7 scheme. Yeah. Of course, many of the low and middle income countries are not in the position of purchasing their own vaccine by themselves because of some limitation. But countries with the ability of purchasing vaccine should consider to help those countries to get enough access to the vaccines. Okay, yeah, of course, even the price of vaccine is very high, very expensive. Yeah, but we understand that hospitalization is more expensive than vaccination. Yeah, or you could say from the other side, vaccination is far cheaper than hospitalization. This calculation, of course, made I mean, based on data in the US. Yeah. So they said average financial cost for hospitalization in I think this is data in last year, is about 145 times, yeah, the reimbursement for vaccinating one person. Yeah, of course, very significant. I think similar comparison we could also get from Indonesia, but I haven't seen any report yet about this calculation. Yeah. So again, this should be understood by everybody that vaccination is cheaper than hospitalization, and we should not wait until people get sick, yeah, and then hospitalized. So we have to try to complete our vaccination program as soon as possible. Okay. And also the other calculation, as mentioned, that for unvaccinated population, the cost is much higher than the vaccinated one. Yeah. Okay. All right. Now I will show you the process of developing a vaccine, yeah, to make the same perception why or understanding why vaccine is so expensive. Yeah, this is just a schematic diagram on how vaccine is developed. First, we have to start with the R&D process. Yeah, this is the outer circle. The R&D process, not normally. If this in the situation of non-pandemic, it would take about probably 3 to 5 years, yeah, to complete the R&D process. Yeah, there are some steps should be done, yeah, some testing and everything before it could reach industrial scale. Yeah, because in industrial scale we have to do scaling up and then optimization and then improve the yield And then we have to start the preclinical trial using animal. Yeah. And then if the result is good, then we start with phase 1 human clinical trial, yeah, to see the safety of the vaccine. And if phase 1 is good, then we would continue to phase 2, yeah, to see the safety and efficacy, and then followed by phase 3, yeah, before we could get the license from the, say, FDA, or in this case, Indonesia, BPOM. Then after completing the phase 3 trial, then we could enter the logistic circle, yeah, before the vaccine could be administered to the population, yeah. So it is quite complicated process, yeah. But in the situation of pandemic, everything should be done in shorter period. The WHO has predicted that minimally we would need about 18 months to develop COVID-19 vaccine. Yeah. Now, based on this approach, then yeah, in my case, Ekman Institute has also developed, is trying to develop a vaccine based on recombinant protein. I'm sorry, this is written in Bahasa Indonesia. Based on recombinant protein, targeting 2 subunit protein, the the spike protein, as well as nucleocapsid protein. So we isolated one of the virus circulating in Indonesia, and then we isolate and amplify the S and N gene, and clone the gene and insert it into factors. And finally, we inserted the gene into the expression system. In this case, we use 2 systems. One is mammalian cells, the Chinese hamster ovary, and the second one is yeast expression system. And yeah, finally, we successfully produce the antigen. Now, the process is currently we are in the transition process to enter into industrial phase. Yeah. And yeah, many people are asking how about the funding of the vaccine development? Yeah, of course, I cannot share with you yet what is, I mean, how much money is prepared by the government of Indonesia in producing vaccine. Probably later we could discuss. But if we look at the other vaccine, yeah, we understand that the government and also other bodies contribute significantly in the funding of vaccine development. Moderna, for example, they receive this amount of money in federal funding, yeah, under the scheme of Operation Warp Speed, and that's why they could speed up the research and development of corona vaccine. Yeah, the Pfizer's also, they receive commitment from the government, yeah, to purchase 100 million doses. Yeah, and Johnson & Johnson also receive this amount of money, yeah, from federal funding to develop the vaccine, of course, including the clinical trial. Novavax also awarded about 1.6 billion under the OWS scheme. Yeah. So from this slide, we could understand that yeah, vaccine development is expensive, but we cannot put the burden into the people. Yeah. So someone, in this case, government, should cover the cost of research and development as well as industrial development of corona vaccine. How about Merah Putih vaccine produced by Indonesia? This is just a first calculation, as already discussed previously by previous speaker about how to achieve the herd immunity. Yeah. So based on that calculation, I think we use the similar calculation. Yeah. We'll calculate the number of population required vaccination. Yeah. This is the formula. And finally, we understand that minimally, if we use this calculation, minimally we have to vaccinate 173 million Indonesian population. And we would need, because we need 2 doses of injection, then we would need about 350 million people, Indonesian people. But currently, Indonesian government is targeting to vaccinate 208 million people. Yeah, that's why we would need 400 million doses. And if we have to calculate also the wastage and everything, so totally we should prepare 450 million doses. The question is, what is the capacity of producing vaccine? Yeah, if we have money, we could just purchase from vaccine producers. Like from currently we receive, for example, from China, from US, from European countries. But again, of course, it will cost a lot of money. On the other hand, we have to check also the world capacity of vaccine production. If I understand correctly, that currently world capacity of vaccine production is only about 80 to less than 90% of world population. Yeah. World population is about 7.5 billion, while world capacity of vaccine production is only about 6 or 6.5 billion doses per year. So that's why we could understand that the supply of vaccine for Indonesia also not always smooth. Yeah. Okay, that's why Indonesia should have its own capacity and capability in producing a vaccine. Yeah, because we cannot rely on supply from other countries. These are just description of vaccine Merah Putih. Yeah, I will not discuss it in detail this time. Okay, so if we are talking about the cost of vaccine development, actually we have to calculate many factors. Yeah, because we have to make sure the safety, efficacy, and also speed of production. As I mentioned before, that we have to complete the process in less than 2 years. Yeah, and then also whether the production would be done by the currently available facilities in industry, and also about the price per dose, we have to calculate very carefully. And one important thing is the acceptance by the regulatory as well as the public. Yeah. These are the factors that influence the cost. But in terms of efficacy, there are several factors that could impact the vaccine efficacy. from host factors, and then vaccine characteristics. And the most serious one currently we are facing is the circulating strain, whether it is lineage or variant of the virus, of the circulating virus, because there are many mutation and change in clades, and also appearance of new variants. Currently, we are busy with the Delta variant, but we don't know what will happen in the next 6 months or 12 months, yeah, whether it is still Delta or there will be another variants. Yeah. Okay. I could see also there are several potential additional costs. Yeah. This is yeah. I'm sorry about the complication of this picture, but I have already mentioned before about this factor. But one additional cost that could increase the cost of vaccine is the willingness to be vaccinated, or we call it vaccine hesitancy. Yeah, of course we have already calculated the wastage. Yeah, this is already calculated about 15% of the vaccine that will be delivered to that probably in the especially in remote area, the wastage probably much higher. Yeah, we receive also report from one area that after the vaccine already delivered to that area and then open, but finally the people refuse to be vaccinated because of the religion reason. Okay. Other cost is social cost. Yeah, this is also I mentioned before the vaccine hesitancy, because based on calculation, survey reported a couple of months ago, there are about 20 to 30% of Indonesian population are still hesitated to be vaccinated. Yeah. This also will cause problem in achieving the herd immunity. Okay. Other factors is also hidden cost of vaccine. I took only one factor. For example, if someone should be vaccinated, then they have to go to vaccinating centers, and they have to wait from early in the morning until evening. Yeah, yeah. Because I know this very well, because my wife has this experience. She had to wait about 3 to 4 hours before finally get vaccinated. Yeah. Of course, it will also influence the indirect cost of the vaccine and vaccination. So in summary, research and development, clinical trial and production, and also distribution of vaccine is extremely costly. And we learn also from many reports that world's leading vaccine developer are financially supported by government or taxpayers. In pandemic situation, cost of vaccine and vaccination are covered mainly by the government. Of course, private sectors could support also, could contribute to cover some of the cost. And then cost of the vaccine will significantly increase with inefficiency in this case wastage and everything, and then vaccine hesitancy, and also vaccine failures. Yeah, we understand that there are several factors that would affect the efficacy of or effectiveness of the vaccine, host factors, vaccine factors, and also virus factors. So that with this, I conclude my presentation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. Amin. Yeah, we have to consider not only the price, to deal with the cost here. Vaccination is cheaper than the hospitalization. I saw there is a question already on that. We can discuss later. But we still have one panelist here. We know that our time is very limited. I'm sorry to Dr. Teteki for waiting. Dr. Sri Harsi Teteki is the last panelist for this morning session on vaccine. The title of the presentation is Vaccine Recognition, the Politics of Vaccine Licensing. Dr. Sri Harsi Teteki is the Director of Marketing, Research and Development, Bio Farma. And she is graduated from Fakultas Kedokteran Universitas Diponegoro and Magister Kesehatan Universitas Diponegoro. So, Ibu Teki, time is yours.
Baik, thank you for announcement and Prof. Mardiati Najib and another panelists. I hope to explain the presentation in bahasa Indonesia ya, Prof. Oke.
Mangga, Ibu.
Display setting.
Baik, yang saya hormati Prof. Mardiati Najib dan rekan-rekan semuanya. Terima kasih untuk undangannya di NIA Scientific Meeting. Kami ingin menyampaikan terkait dengan ada itunya ya. Okay. Ingin menyampaikan tentang vaksin recognize dan policy of vaccine licensing. Outline yang kami akan sampaikan adalah peran strategi vaksin saat ini, strategi penyediaan vaksin COVID, juga perjuangan diplomasi vaksin, regulasi dan penugasan ke Bio Farma, serta jumlah dan jenis vaksin COVID-19. Mohon maaf. Sekilas tentang Bio Farma kami sampaikan, kami adalah holding BUMN Farmasi dengan 3 entitas, Bio Farma, Indo Farma, dan Kimia Farma. Dan kami ada di posisi di Bandung untuk Bio Farma di Jalan Pasteur. Kami mulai untuk peran strategi vaksin saat ini, di mana kita mengetahui bahwa vaksin dalam kondisi pandemi ini sangat-sangat penting dan memiliki peran di global health security, di mana prioritas kesehatan masyarakat mengalahkan beberapa ekonomi kesehatan yang tentunya ini jadi komitmen dari pemerintah Indonesia untuk kesehatan masyarakat harus dipulihkan dulu dan ekonomi baru prioritas berikutnya. Dan tentunya kita juga mengenal terkait dengan PPKM yang mana itu adalah gas dan rem yang selalu dimainkan untuk strategi. Dalam global health security tentunya juga kita memahami bahwa pandemi ini adalah sesuatu hal yang tidak pernah kita duga sebelumnya dan kita tidak cukup siap untuk melakukan mengatasi pandemi ini secara cepat. Sehingga lesson yang kita lihat adalah kita harus memperkuat kapasitas dan sistem kesehatan nasional, dan juga vaksin ini juga dapat mencegah, melindungi, dan mengendalikan wabah menjadi satu lesson yang kita sudah bisa lakukan selama ini. Terbukti beberapa vaksin ini secara diplomasi juga kita melihat sukses story dalam penanggulangan polio di Afghanistan. Itu fungsi dari vaksin ini menjadi sesuatu hal yang bisa kita lakukan sebagai sarana diplomasi internasional. Vaksin juga sebagai media untuk mengesampingkan konflik politik dan bisa bersatu untuk menanggulangi pandemi. Vaksin juga memiliki peran strategik lainnya, yaitu sebagai kolaborasi internasional, satu negara dengan negara lain bersama-sama bekerja sama internasional untuk dalam upaya mengembangkan platform baru atau jenis-jenis vaksin baru. Dan kita juga melihat banyaknya keterlibatan dari pihak-pihak NGO, baik itu Bill Melinda Gates dan Wellcome Trust dan lain-lain. Kami mulai untuk strategi penyediaan dari vaksin akan kami bagi menjadi jangka pendek dan jangka panjang dan menengah. Untuk yang jangka pendek sendiri, Indonesia sudah melakukan beberapa skema yang dilakukan, baik itu secara bilateral maupun hibah. Untuk bilateral sendiri, kita melihat bahwa ada direct processing yang langsung melalui Bio Farma, melalui penugasan yang memang diberikan oleh pemerintah Indonesia kepada Bio Farma. Ini kami bagi dengan melakukan direct processing baik itu import produk jadi maupun tax transfer bulk RTF. Dan untuk import produk jadi ada 4 jenis vaksin, yaitu Sinovac, Biotech, AstraZeneca B2B Thailand, dan Novavax SII dan Sinopharm. Sedangkan transfer teknologi bulk RTF ready to fill kita bekerja sama dengan Sinovac Biotech Cina. Kemudian ada skema bilateral tetapi direct processing-nya langsung ke pemerintah, yaitu melalui Pfizer. Berikutnya adalah terkait dengan hibah multilateral atau melalui COVAX Facility. Kita melihat bahwa untuk hibah multilateral atau COVAX Facility ini sudah dibicarakan oleh pembicara sebelumnya. Pada dasarnya adalah untuk supaya menjaga akses kesetaraan antar negara, terutama adalah negara-negara menengah ke bawah, yang mana untuk akses untuk mendapatkan vaksin ini tadi disampaikan adalah baru 2% ya, dan sementara negara-negara maju sudah sangat banyak mendapatkan kesempatan untuk divaksin. Untuk itu COVAX Facility ada beberapa jenis vaksin yang ada di Indonesia, yaitu AstraZeneca, Moderna, Pfizer, Sinovac. Kemudian ada juga yang hibah bilateral, yaitu langsung dari negara ke negara, yaitu melalui Sinovac, melalui UAE. Kemudian AstraZeneca ini ada banyak yang mensuplai dari Jepang, Australia, Inggris, Belanda, Korea, Spanyol, Italia, dan Prancis. Serta dari RRP dalam bentuk Sinovac, serta Belanda dalam bentuk GNG. Bapak dan Ibu, kami ingin menyampaikan bahwa strategi jangka menengah dan panjang yang akan dilakukan di Indonesia adalah pertama adalah pengembangan vaksin baru dari proses hulu ke hilir. Kita melihat tadi ada vaksin merah putih dan vaksin kolaborasi internasional yang kami lakukan dengan sebutan vaksin BUMN. Kemudian juga dengan adanya pandemi ini kita memerlukan penguasaan multiple platform untuk pengembangan vaksin pandemi dan beyond COVID-19 nantinya. Yang akan kita rencanakan adalah penguasaan platform mRNA maupun viral vector adenovirus. Ini semua tertuang untuk supaya pada saat barangkali nanti akan pandemi lagi, kita sudah bisa cukup siap. Dan strategi untuk pemenuhan dari vaksin ini memang ada 3 yang menjadi penting, yaitu speed, access, dan scalability. 3 hal inilah yang menjadi faktor keberhasilan dalam penyediaan dari vaksin. Bagaimana dengan COVAX Facility? Seperti yang tertuang dalam dokumen di 1 Desember 2020, Indonesia termasuk yang menyampaikan expression of interest untuk berpartisipasi dalam COVAX Facility. Ini ditandatangani oleh Menteri Kesehatan dan Menlu pada 16 Oktober 2020. Jadi Gavi atau Global Alliance for Vaccine and Immunization memperkenalkan strategi baru untuk menjamin akses terhadap vaksin ini secara cepat, merata, dan aman dengan melalui COVAX Facility. Dan Indonesia termasuk negara 92 negara ANC Fund Market Commitment dalam COVAX Facility dan memiliki kesempatan untuk mendapatkan vaksin full subsidized dari dosis gratis dengan target 3 sampai 20%. Rencananya adalah sekitar 54 juta orang nanti akan menjadi target sasaran untuk vaksin-vaksin yang disediakan lewat COVAX Facility. Artinya kalau 54 juta mungkin akan dikalikan 2 dosis, jadi sekitar 100 juta lebih. Kemudian cara kerja dari COVAX Facility ini kita bisa melihat ada tahapan konfirmasi untuk partisipasi dari setiap negara yang dipilih, kemudian kita juga akan di-assess preparation-nya, kemudian readiness assessment, allocation, dan vaksin release. Kemudian kita melihat beberapa checklist yang harus dilakukan terkait dengan vaksin karakteristik maupun itu vaksin platformnya dari mRNA, inactivated atau viral vector itu pilihan, dan kemarin memang kami di awal menginformasikan bahwa Bio Farma lebih siap untuk platform yang saat ini adalah inactivated. Dan akhirnya dalam kenyataannya di akhir-akhir ini adalah kita bisa menerima juga platform mRNA. Demikian juga kita juga di-assess terkait dengan regulatory proses dan juga terkait dengan food chain requirement yang kami akan mengisi beberapa kuesioner seberapa Indonesia ataupun Bio Farma dan dinas-dinas kesehatan siap untuk menerima vaksin dengan cold chain yang memang memenuhi seperti 2-8 untuk inactivated ini terutama, dan yang -20 maupun -70. Ini adalah hal-hal yang terus kami koordinasikan. Kami ingin menceritakan tentang perjuangan dari diplomasi vaksin sendiri sebagai satu bentuk keberhasilan yang kami katakan oleh Menteri Luar Negeri bersama Kementerian BUMN dan Kementerian Kesehatan tentunya bahwa ada supply agreement yang sudah ditandatangani pada saat 20 Agustus 2020 oleh Kementerian BUMN dan Kementerian Luar Negeri. Saat itu memang kami mencari jenis vaksin yang mana yang sudah cukup siap dan masuk dalam list WHO, tetapi dalam hal ini masih bisa memenuhi apa yang menjadi platform ataupun ketersediaan dari food chain yang ada di Indonesia. Dan kita melihat bahwa di November ini sudah ada kedatangan dari BAL, CoronaVax, kemudian ada pembentukan KMK yang sudah dikeluarkan oleh pemerintah Indonesia terkait dengan jenis-jenis vaksin yang nanti akan ada di Indonesia, dan ini sudah kita mulai produksi dan sudah kita lakukan uji klinis fase 3 di Indonesia. Tentunya ini sudah lihat timelinenya, dan kalau kita mengandalkan mRNA dan sebagainya atau COVAX Facility tanpa kita berjuang sebelumnya, tentu ini akan baru bisa mendapatkan vaksin itu sekitar Maret akhir, dan tentunya sampai sekarang posisi sebulannya sudah cukup banyak dari berbagai macam vaksin yang ada. Bapak dan Ibu, kita bisa melihat posisi untuk gap antara satu negara dengan negara yang lain. Jadi Indonesia saat ini posisi tanggal 18 kita sudah 37% mendapatkan vaksinasi pertama, kedua 21, dan dari total sasaran 208 juta. Terkait dengan dukungan regulasi dalam proses pengadaan dari vaksin sendiri, memang sudah dibuat satu Perpres khusus sejak adanya Kepres 12/2020 tentang penetapan bahwa pandemi COVID ini adalah merupakan bencana non-alam yang mana merupakan satu kewajiban dari seluruh kementerian dan lembaga yang terkait untuk mendukung dari mulai pusat maupun daerah. Dan tentunya kami melihat bahwa Perpres 99/2020 adalah induk dari aturan-aturan regulasi yang ada terkait dengan pengadaan vaksin dan pelaksanaan vaksinasi dalam rangka penanggulangan pandemi COVID ini. Dan Perpres 99 ini sudah diubah beberapa kali, dan terakhir adalah PP 50 tahun 2021 tentang perubahan kedua di PP 99. tahun 2020. Perpres ini kemudian diturunkan baik itu Permenkes maupun PMK dari keuangan. Permenkes kita lihat ada 16 dan sebagainya. Kemudian Kemenkesmu, KMK juga banyak sekali yang diterbitkan terkait dengan pedoman dari penugasan pengadaan dari vaksin COVID ini kepada Bio Farma, dan ada juga jenis-jenis vaksin yang akan beredar di Indonesia pun ditetapkan oleh Kementerian Kesehatan. Ini adalah regulasi yang memberikan fasilitas kepabeanan atau cukai, bukti keseriusan dari pemerintah untuk bisa mengurangi dan memperlancar dalam kewajiban fiskal yang ada. Dan tentunya semua dituangkan dalam perjanjian penugasan kontrak dengan Kementerian Kesehatan dengan Bio Farma dari awal adalah di 6 November 2020 dimulai dengan 3 juta CoronaVac dan selanjutnya yang 122,5 juta Sinovac produksi dari Bio Farma. Dan semua Bio Farma untuk melakukan proses regulasi ini kami mendapatkan pendampingan dari BPKP Jabar.
Ibu, mohon maaf, waktunya 5 menit lagi.
Baik, Bapak dan Ibu, kami ingin menyampaikan dukungan pengawalan kedatangan vaksin adalah dari mulai awal di 6 Desember dan saat ini sudah ada 75 kali kedatangan, dan kita melihat kementerian lembaga terkait yang sudah kita selama ini mendapatkan dukungan sangat cukup banyak. Dan ini adalah bagaimana Indonesia melakukan pemilihan jenis dan vaksin yang memang bisa beredar adalah melalui rekomendasi dari SAGE tanggal 7 Oktober 2020 bahwa efikasi ideal adalah 70% dan minimal adalah 50%, keamanan, lama perlindungan panjang, dan stabilitas penyimpanan 2-8, kemasan multidos dan platform yang sama untuk memudahkan evaluasi dan ada otorisasi penggunaan oleh BPOM. Kemudian ITAGI menerjemahkan hampir sama juga, kita berharap sama, dan tujuan dari vaksinasi sendiri menurut Ketua ITAGI Prof. Sri Rejeki adalah menurunkan kesakitan, kematian, dan juga untuk mempercepat tercapainya herd immunity dan melindungi memperkuat sistem kesehatan dan tentunya menjaga produktivitas dan meminimalkan dampak sosial. Bapak dan Ibu, kami sampaikan beberapa spesifikasi vaksin yang beredar di dunia seperti ini, dan saat ini mungkin COVAX juga ada inactivated dari Sinovac dan Sinopharm. Kemudian ini adalah short term strategi yang kami lakukan untuk pengadaan vaksin sesuai dengan penugasan pemerintah. Ini menerjemahkan yang tadi kami sampaikan bahwa sampai saat ini ada 173 juta dosis melalui direct processing produk jadi oleh Bio Farma Holding dan Kementerian Kesehatan. Yang Kementerian Kesehatan tadi adalah Pfizer 50 juta, selebihnya melalui Bio Farma adalah jumlahnya 3 juta, 20, 50, 50. Ini posisinya yang terkait langsung produk jadi. Sementara untuk yang COVAX sampai hari ini posisi sudah 49,9 juta dan lewat Bio Farma bulk RTF dari Sinopharm sudah terproduksi 122,5 juta yang akan rilis mungkin pertengahan Oktober lengkap 122,5 juta. Bapak dan Ibu, ini adalah beberapa gambaran terkait dengan vaksin yang beredar di Indonesia. Barangkali ini bisa saya singkat saja bahwa Sinovac ada 2, CoronaVac dan vaksin produksi dari Bio Farma. Kita bisa melihat dan jumlah-jumlahnya ada di bawah dengan jenis kemasan dan jadwal pemberian. Juga AstraZeneca banyak sekali yang beredar. Kita melihat baik itu COVAX AstraZeneca 19,9 juta dan B2B adalah 20 juta targetnya. Kemudian Moderna nanti adalah 8 juta jumlahnya, kemudian Pfizer adalah 50 juta melalui dengan pemerintah dan 5,4 melalui COVAX Facility. Kemudian Johnson & Johnson baru datang 3 juta juga. Kemudian Sinopharm juga ada yang hibah 750.000, ini untuk kelompok disable dan ini sudah kita distribusikan. Sementara ada satu vaksin Sinopharm juga, tetapi melalui gotong royong sejumlah 7,5 juta. Kemudian Bapak dan Ibu, ini adalah gambaran terkait dengan Bio Farma bersama dengan UNPAD untuk melakukan uji klinis fase 3, dan ini adalah inspeksi yang dilakukan oleh BPOM dan juga Presiden RI Pak Jokowi juga hadir pada saat awal kick off-nya. Kemudian ini vaksin progres merah putih tadi mungkin sudah disampaikan oleh Prof. Amin. Jadi ini posisi kami nanti untuk vaksin merah putih direncanakan barangkali baru Q4 2022. Kemudian vaksin merah putih lainnya adalah lewat Biotis dan Universitas Airlangga. Barangkali ini akan lebih cepat. Mudah-mudahan nanti adalah Q2 2022 akan ada EUA. Dan ini adalah vaksin BUMN. Kami bekerja sama dengan Baylor College Medicine. Kita mendapatkan seat dari sana dan sudah terdaftar di dalam list WHO dan akan ada di April 2022 untuk siap. Dan ini adalah dari sekian banyak yang kami sudah adakan, kita sudah melakukan distribusi di posisi 18 September, 169 juta, barangkali hari ini sudah mungkin 170 juta, dan sudah tervaksinasi 124,8, tersebar di beberapa lokasi distribusi, 34 provinsi, bahwa penetapan alokasi distribusi ini akan dilakukan dengan strategi dari Kementerian Kesehatan. Penentuan titik serah ditetapkan oleh Kementerian Kesehatan dan penugasan distribusi ke Bio Farma dapat juga melibatkan PBS Mitra melalui hub-hub yang sudah kita tunjuk. Semua proses distribusi dilakukan juga pendampingan seperti penetapan dalam harga dari vaksin COVID-19. Demikian mungkin yang bisa kami sampaikan. Terima kasih. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Terima kasih banyak Ibu Teki, informasinya penting Ibu, tapi mohon maaf sekali harus dipotong karena waktu terbatas. Sebetulnya ini kalau kita diskusi tentang vaksin harusnya seharian ini. Kalau kita bikin workshop sendiri juga mungkin nggak kelar kali ya Bu ya. Gitu. Jadi Bu Teki tadi share kepada kita info-info penting bahwa vaksin yang sekarang ada di negara kita ini ada banyak platform, ada inactivated, mRNA, viral vector, ada Sinovac, Sinopharm, Pfizer, Moderna, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson, vaksin merah putih yang akan dikembangkan, dan Bio Farma terbayang ini Bu ya akan sangat sibuk gitu. Belum lagi kalau vaksin rutinnya nanti tetap harus jalan. Bapak Ibu sekalian, para hadirin peserta Inahya, kita masih punya waktu ya panitia untuk sedikit membuka diskusi karena keempat panelis kita sudah share informasi-informasi penting. Paling tidak saya sudah membaca dari question and answer ada satu pertanyaan mungkin meskipun ini ditujukan pada Prof. Amin, tapi saya rasa barangkali Dr. Somil juga bisa merespon. Tetapi dari perspektif herd immunity yang menyebabkan ada trigger ke arah cost efektif, barangkali Dr. Panji juga bisa menyampaikan, dan Bu Teki juga barangkali bisa menambahkan info yang mungkin relevan. Pertanyaannya, vaksinasi itu lebih cost efektif dibandingkan penanganan COVID. Tapi kita tahu ada kemungkinan mutasi virus COVID seperti varian baru Mu yang dicurigai dapat menghindari imunitas yang telah terbentuk sehingga dapat memungkinkan diperlukan vaksin booster yang akan meningkatkan biaya kesehatan. Bagaimana strategi untuk adanya vaksin booster di kemudian hari? Apakah akan diserahkan pada mekanisme pasar atau kembali disubsidi oleh pemerintah? Mohon penjelasan dari para panelis. Saya persilahkan mungkin, so I'd like to invite Dr. Somil, maybe you have a comment or respond to this question, Dr. Somil. Dr. Somil, are you there? Oke, Prof. Amin, mungkin Prof. Amin, silahkan Prof.
Terima kasih. Bahasa Inggris atau bahasa Indonesia? Atau bahasa Jawa?
Boleh Prof, bebas Prof.
Oke, ya, karena saya lihat ada interpreter ya. Baik.
Ya, Prof.
Ya, untuk mengantisipasi varian-varian baru, ya tentu memang harus dikaji terus-menerus efficacy dan effectiveness dari vaksin. Jadi satu studi yang dilaporkan dari Afrika Selatan misalnya, itu menunjukkan bahwa terhadap varian yang di sana, yang varian B1351 ya, yang beta, itu terjadi penurunan efikasi terhadap beberapa vaksin yang leading ya, itu turunnya 10-20%. tetapi penurunan itu belum sampai menyebabkan efikasinya di bawah 50%. Ya, seperti kita ketahui, WHO menyebutkan selama efikasi vaksin di atas 50% itu masih dianggap efektif. Nah, tentu kita tetap harus mengawasi, ya, satu, apakah memang terjadi penurunan efikasi sampai di bawah 50% yang menyebabkan harus disesuaikan, ya. Yang kedua, kita juga harus terus mengawasi circulating virus. Jadi apakah tadi saya sebutkan, apakah masih tetap Delta, apakah ada Mu akan naik, ataukah yang C12 ya, C12 itu akan bertambah, atau mungkin juga vaksin, lineage lokal Indonesia yang B14662 misalnya itu juga terus harus diawasi apakah dia bisa nanti berubah menjadi varian yang punya sifat, apakah itu bisa melepaskan diri dari antibodi, ataukah dia sulit didiagnosis, ataukah menyebabkan derajat berat ringannya penyakit itu ya tambah berat, atau menjadi cepat menular. Nah, itu yang harus terus dicermati, karena saat ini memang kita mengantisipasi di jangka panjangnya, apakah kalau misalnya COVID-19 ini sudah jadi endemis, ya, apakah kita akan memperlakukan itu seperti kita memperlakukan virus influenza, ya, jadi setiap tahun harus disuntik, dan suntikannya itu bisa diubah-ubah, karena suntikan yang tahun ini sama tahun depan mungkin harus disesuaikan dengan virus yang bersirkulasi. Nah, terkait dengan apakah ini akan dimasukkan skema gratis atau berbayar, setahu saya sih kalau pandemi itu harusnya di cover oleh pemerintah. Tapi kalau sudah bukan pandemi, aturannya akan berbeda. Ya, jadi mungkin ada kontribusi dari individual, ya. Jadi mungkin berbayar, tetapi sebagian disubsidi misalnya. Ya, itu mekanismenya sampai saat ini belum dibahas. Demikian, Prof. Mardiati.
Terima kasih, Prof. Amin. Dr. Panji.
Terima kasih, Prof. Mardiati. Ini pertanyaan yang sangat sulit karena ada banyak juga pertanyaannya ya. Yang pertama adalah bagaimana effectiveness dari vaksin itu bisa turun karena adanya varian-varian baru. Dan tentunya kalau effectiveness menurun, cost effectiveness juga bisa menurun. Tetapi kemudian bagaimana strategi vaksin booster, dan yang ketiga adalah apakah ini diserahkan pada mekanisme pasar atau tidak. Yang pertama ini dulu ya. Tentunya ini a lot of uncertainties, Prof. Mardiati dan para hadirin semua. Jadi kita belum tahu separah apa nanti dampak dari varian-varian baru. Yang kedua yang paling penting adalah kembali strategi imunisasi ini kita mau apa sih tujuannya? Kalau untuk meningkatkan herd immunity yang pada akhirnya meningkatkan untuk arah eliminasi mungkin tidak bisa ya. Tetapi selama dia lebih efektif dari strategi lain untuk menurunkan morbiditas dan mortalitas, saya pikir vaksinasi akan tetap lebih cost efektif dibandingkan penanganan COVID yang lain. Permasalahannya adalah kalau untuk booster ini strateginya bagaimana? Ada dua sebenarnya. Ini pertanyaannya ada dua ya. Yang pertama adalah kepada siapa booster harus diberikan, dan yang kedua baru kita mau menjawab ini bagaimana mekanismenya. Tentu agak sulit untuk menjawab booster harus diberikan kepada siapa, karena kita harus tahu terlebih dahulu bagaimana profil imunitas dan profil profil imunitas dari kelompok usia, dan bagaimana profil imunitas tersebut berubah akibat adanya varian-varian baru. Tentunya kembali kepada tujuan dari vaksinasi. Kalau kita mau meningkatkan atau menurunkan morbiditas dan mortalitas, kita harus menargetkan populasi yang paling tinggi morbiditas dan mortalitasnya. Tetapi kalau kita mau menciptakan herd immunity, sebenarnya yang kita harus targetkan adalah mereka yang paling transmissible, yang paling menularkan. Nah, ini kita belum tahu ya, karena ya kita juga belum paham benar profil dari transmissibility dari penyakitnya nanti. Nah, yang kedua baru mekanisme pasar atau kembali ke subsidi ke pemerintah. Nah, ini kembali juga nih masalahnya adalah nanti disease burden-nya seperti apa. Kalau varian baru ini benar-benar menghilangkan efek dari previous infection, ya, artinya menghilangkan immunity completely, ini kan sama seperti mempunyai gelombang pandemi baru. Kita dapat agent infeksius yang baru dan orang ini punya very little to no immunity gitu ya. Nah, kalau seperti ini kan dampak public health-nya akan sangat besar. Nah, sehingga kalau diserahkan ke mekanisme pasar, tentu efek herd immunity-nya akan sulit dicapai ya. Nah, yang kedua, walaupun ini cost efektif, saya pikir kita tetap harus melihat budget impact ya. Sanggup enggak gitu ya kalau kita kita tahu ini harus semua orang atau harus banyak orang divaksinasi, kita tahu bahwa ini cost efektif, tetapi sanggup enggak bayarnya? Kalau sanggup bayar ya semestinya ya idealnya ya apapun dilakukan supaya pemerintah mampu membayar cost dari vaksinasi ini, karena kita tahu dalam kesehatan ekonominya itu tidak normal ya, imperfect gitu. Jadi ada freeloaders lah, segala macam lah. Kalau orang udah banyak divaksinasi pasti lebih banyak yang males divaksinasi gitu, karena kan udah banyak yang divaksin gitu kan. Nah, ini akan sulit sekali.
Rider ya.
Free riders. Jadi ya ini very difficult question. Tetapi ya kembali ya kita memang masih memerlukan banyak informasi, banyak data. Dan saya yakin ini akan berubah terus ya analisis kita ke depan. Tapi the bottom line itu vaksinasi itu harus kita maintain coverage-nya tetap tinggi. Dan bukan hanya vaksinasi tapi immunity ya. Immunity harus kita maintain coverage-nya tinggi. Selebihnya uncertain, Bu. Mohon maaf, saya baru bisa menjawab seperti itu. Kembali ke Prof. Mardiati.
Ya, terima kasih Dr. Panji, setuju. Ya, Bu Teki, silakan Ibu.
Baik, Prof. Mardiati Najib, terkait dengan kemungkinan efektivitas vaksin dalam hal ini untuk penanganan COVID, dan kita memang melihat riset ini terus ada dan terus dilakukan terkait beberapa jenis vaksin yang ada, bahkan mix ya Bu, Prof, mix ada beberapa yang koktail untuk vaksinasi dari platform satu dengan platform yang lain. Dan untuk regulasi tahun depan memang sudah dibahas di beberapa pertemuan yang ada. Booster ini sebetulnya akan dilakukan kapan? Kita melihat sensitivity sosial yang memang menjadi salah satu isu. Apakah memang ada satu kemungkinan vaksin yang seharusnya pada masa pandemi ini harusnya memang pemerintah melakukan gratis kepada semua masyarakat. Dan itu sudah dibuktikan. Vaksin yang ada kebutuhan di Indonesia untuk 2020 diberikan gratis oleh negara. Dan bagaimana dengan vaksin gotong royong? Mungkin saya akan sedikit memberikan informasi karena itu pada prinsipnya juga gratis, tetapi melalui pendanaan non APBN yang disebut dengan pendanaan badan hukum dan badan usaha. Mereka membeli vaksin secara kumpulan dan kemudian memberikan kepada sasaran karyawan, keluarga maupun masyarakat sekitar. Nah, ini sudah dilakukan di vaksin gotong royong. Nah, apakah booster itu nanti akan juga boleh diberikan dengan masyarakat membeli vaksin sendiri atau tetap akan ditanggung oleh pemerintah? Saya rasa ini regulasi yang terus sangat sensitif digulirkan dalam high level. Nah, apakah kapan akan diberikan booster itu? Memang ada beberapa wacana. Pada saat itu memang setelah September, atau nanti apakah memang secara tertentu setelah equity-nya ini tercukupi antar satu negara-negara yang lain baru akan dilakukan tahun depan 2022. Ini memang menjadi satu pembicaraan yang sangat hangat selama ini di beberapa high level. Kemudian di 2022 kemungkinan adalah vaksin ini adalah dibiayai oleh APBN adalah untuk PBI saja. Sehingga untuk wacana yang non-PBI tentunya akan merupakan vaksin yang berbayar. Tapi ini semua regulasi tetap akan terus digodok dan kami menunggu juga dari kementerian terkait yang memang sesuai dengan kebutuhannya, berapa jumlahnya. Kita Bio Farma juga menyiapkan vaksin BUMN, vaksin merah putih, dan bersama dengan perguruan tinggi terus melakukan kesiapan tersebut agar affordable itu bisa kita sajikan pada saatnya. Terima kasih, mungkin itu Prof. Makasih.
Terima kasih Bu Teki. Saya ingin mengucapkan terima kasih kepada semua panelis. Jadi diskusi kita sangat menarik dan penting yang harusnya ini seharian kali ya kita membahas tentang vaksin. Dan ini memang momen yang bagus sekali sebetulnya untuk mengungkapkan bahwa ekonomi itu memang penting untuk bisa membangun kesehatan. Tetapi kesehatan itu juga sangat penting gitu untuk bisa membangun ekonomi. Jadi hubungan timbal balik ini bagaimana berjalan selaras, dan salah satunya adalah melalui vaksinasi tadi yang dijelaskan bahwa herd immunity itu harus bisa dicapai, coveragenya harus tinggi, kemudian ada hal-hal yang terkait dengan kebijakan yang harus menjadi pertimbangan. Terima kasih atas partisipasinya pada semua peserta, pada panelis. Mohon maaf atas segala kekurangan, saya tahu waktunya agak molor ya, tadi kita telat beberapa menit ya Mas MC, tapi kemudian kita mendengarkan hal-hal penting dan menarik yang akan bermanfaat. Terima kasih, selamat pagi, Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Thank you to all speakers and our moderator, Professor Dr. Mardiati Najib, for the insightful session. Ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to the next session, let's do a photo session together first. Therefore, we invite all speakers and moderator, as well as all participants, to open your camera and show your best smile. So please prepare yourselves. All right, everybody, to all participants, please open your camera as we are going to take a picture together with all of the panelists and also our moderator. All right, I'm going to take the lead and count backwards.
Okay.
3, 2, 1, smile.
Yeah.
All right, thank you everyone.
Okay, thank you.
Prof. Mardiati, Prof. Amin Subandrio, udah lama.
Prof. Gufron, apa kabar?
Ya, siap, baik-baik. Ini Prof. Jusni ada di sini, sudah. Bu Yulita ada gabung.
Pagi, Prof. Gufron. Apa kabar,
pagi.
Prof?
Baik, Prof. Mardiati, waduh.
Apa kabar, Prof. Gufron?
Baik.
Apa kabar?
Iya.
Alright, to all of the panelists, thank you so much for spending your morning with us today and sharing all of the insightful materials with us today. And now we are going